Last week was awesome. For those of you that weren't able to be here, Connecting Point, our small group sign up, is something that we celebrate 3 times a year as we move into different semesters, and that was last week's kind of party for our summer semester sign up. And small groups are a huge part of how we achieve one of our goals of just cultivating life-changing community. And if you've never been in a small group before, I'd encourage you to join one. If you haven't had the opportunity, if you missed it last week, that's okay. There's still lots of good small groups that I think you'd really appreciate that you can join. Don't miss out on some of the best friends you might make that you never thought you were going to make at church before. I know I've joined small groups where I made literally some of my best friends. Most of my wedding party came from a church small group that I joined when I was younger. And so for you, you can head to our website, theprojectyeg.com, and check out a group, sign up, and don't miss out on that next great community that you might be looking for. We live in an irrational society in a lot of ways. Like, we want to have it both ways. We want to have our cake and eat it too. We want our fiction to be true. I'm not trying to rhyme, it just happened to go that way. We want our shrimp to be jumbo and our ice to be dry. We want to be alone together. We love the sound of silence, and even more irrational, there are actually people out there who believe the Calgary Flames could win the Stanley Cup this year. We live in a culture that is actually increasingly comfortable in this space of contradictions. And there's these clear, like these things we're talking about, those examples of oxymorons, they're clearly just like linguistic erosion over time where we've kind of messed up the words and we know what they mean, but if you're talking to an English professor, they'd probably yell at you, but really we get what the point is. But as a culture, we generally are more and more okay with these contradictions. We're okay to be in this kind of gray zone space. And these elements actually are starting to blend into our worldview as a society altogether. It's beyond just an oxymoron of language. It's become, in a lot of ways, comfort within the oxymoron of our life and our worldview as a society. Increasingly, we seem to be okay with a little bit of dysfunction in our lives, our philosophy, our worldview. And it makes us comfortable in a lot of ways because generally we're willing to put on the blinders to the realities of our life and move forward, even if it's inherently ignorant, foolish, or that it's just plain wrong. But it's way more comfortable because we don't have to deal with the realities of the situations in our lives. For example, a good example would be we'll ignore the red flags in a relationship, right? How many of us have been in a bad relationship in the past and now we look at it, we're like, man, I cannot believe I didn't see that coming because there was red flags everywhere. I've been there. You're like, what was I thinking? I had the blinders on. Because we look at these situations and we're like, yeah, you know what? Probably shouldn't date this person, but like, she's nicer than my last relationship and she doesn't want kids and I do, but you know, whatever, we'll figure that out down the road. Nothing bad could come from that. Or, you know, we don't really have anything in common, but look at that body, right? Move on, it's fine. Like, I don't have to worry about anything else because this person is super hot and attractive, so what does it matter? We'll just march forward. We'll deal with the consequences down the road because right now, I just want to move ahead. Even if we know that there's gonna be something stupid that's gonna come from, or bad that comes from our stupid decisions, we'd rather just kind of move along with life as it is because it's easier to move forward with blinders on than it is to recognize the falsehood or the mistake that could come from the way that we're living our lives. The reality is that we're all desperately looking for happiness, and desperation will lead you to make bad decisions. There's not a lot of times in my life where I've made a quick decision out of desperation that down the road I was like, that was a good decision, Jeff. I'm glad you did that, buddy. No, usually it's like, what were you thinking? What was I thinking? That was so foolish. It was right there. What was I thinking? And I think, man, if I would have just thought a little bit more, if I would have taken my time, analyzed the situation, maybe I wouldn't have ended up having my life fall apart. Just me? We're looking for happiness everywhere, in our relationships, in our work, with our families, in our own minds, psychologically. We're looking everywhere to be happy. And I get that. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes the desire to be happy can become so strong that it blinds us from reality. That it leads us to a mindset where we are willing to ignore the red flags in our lives beyond just relationships with partners, with husbands and wives, or boyfriends and girlfriends, whatever it is. But we are willing to concede some logic and concede what is best for us for comfortability. Because we want to be happy, and if we don't focus too hard on those red flags, if we don't focus too hard on the realities of the situation, well, then we can just distract ourselves long enough that we won't have to acknowledge that we're living in a negative place in life, or that we're headed towards destruction, or even just towards uncertainty and not the best version of our lives and the best versions of us that we could live out. But in all areas of life, distracting doesn't solve any problems. It's like turning up the music in your car to mask a fart. It doesn't solve the smell. It just distracts. It doesn't fix the problem. And that sounds preposterous, but that is literally what we do in a lot of areas of our lives. We try to mask the situation. We try to have a solution that doesn't actually correlate with the problem at hand. And maybe one of the strongest examples of this is this in our society and our culture today, in the area of religious and spiritual plurality or pluralism. Very much in our society, we're living in a postmodern and, dare I say, even post-truth society. A philosophy where truth has been relegated beyond what is provable or true inherently, and been moved into a space where lived experience and everyone can kind of do their own thing, and that's what trumps all other elements of life. And in most situations, that's actually out of a heart of being kind or of being loving and not causing problems or rude. And I think that generally most people that subscribe to this philosophy in life are not trying to be dumb or trying to be bad people. They're trying to be kind and trying to be loving to the world around them. We don't want to cause problems. We don't want to be mean to anybody. We don't want to challenge anybody where we don't have to, because we've all met that person that's just always looking for a fight, right? That person, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're gonna have an argument against it. Even if it's something they believe in, they just like to argue. We don't want to be that person. So we kind of just step to the sidelines and let everyone do what they want to do. If it really doesn't directly step on my toes, then it doesn't matter. Like, I'll just do whatever, believe what you want, be who you want, whatever it is. There is no truth, because if I told you the truth, it might cause conflict, and nobody likes conflict, right? But that doesn't work when it comes to the most important conversations in life. Why are we here? What about God? Where is the wiggle room within this? How can we believe in all these different pseudo-spiritual elements, all these different religions? How can there be all these different perspectives, yet there's God? Well, let's take a look. When we look at the Bible, and every week here at the Project, we go to the Bible because we know that that's a book that is not just some old text that we got to blow the dust off of because it's ancient and irrelevant, but it's a living thing that really just brings out the person of Jesus and puts us in contact with who he is and what he calls us to in our lives. So when we look to the Bible, that's what we're doing, and we're going to do that this week as we always do. So I want to take a look at the book of Exodus, chapter 20, and it's going to be put up on the screen here. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or this earth in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. Exodus 23-5. So here's the thing. It might sound like, well, that's not very inclusive. There's only one God. You can't have any other gods. And God's like, I'm actually pretty jealous when you bring other gods or other things that you would worship into the conversation. And yeah, that doesn't sound very inclusive, but think about it. If you were God, if you created the universe, and everybody else and everyone in the world starts worshiping things that literally don't exist, start giving credit to the creation of the universe and loving humans and creating humans, and they start worshiping other gods, other deities, other ideas, or worshiping literal statues and stuff like that. Think about it from this perspective. If you had kids, you have a son or a daughter, and you like gave up your career, you stayed home, you had all these dreams, all these ambitions of who you wanted to be, but I'm gonna sacrifice that for my kids because I love my kids. And I'm just like, I'm gonna put my life on hold, and I gave up all my money. We haven't been on a nice vacation in 15 years because my kids need to go to college. And then those kids refuse to call you dad, and they start calling some random person down the street dad or mom. It would cause some sense of this unjust feeling in your heart, and it would become intolerable in your mind. Think about God who created you, God who created the world, God who created everything and loves you, and yet the idea that somebody would say and give the credit of what God has done to something that is not God is a rebellion. It would be something that would cause an feeling of this justice or this lack of justice. And of course God is jealous of that. Not in the sense that when we look at jealousy, you and me, we hear that term and we think, well, no one wants a jealous person. It doesn't mean that God is this unkind, insecure God that doesn't have any sort of like sense of who he is and needs us to justify his own existence. It's the sense that God will not tolerate anything else that tries to take his place, because he is the only God. And that's what we run into in this verse. And this was not necessarily something that was acted out on very well, especially in the Old Testament, all throughout human history. But in the first half of the Bible, in the Old Testament, we see a lot of cultures and a lot of people, including people who claim to follow God himself, falling into the trap of this in a lot of ways. The Old Testament is the first half of the Bible, kind of everything before Jesus' birth, and we see all these different conversations, all these different cultures running into this mistake. That book of Exodus was the second book of the Bible, and that was written right after the Jewish people had escaped slavery in Egypt. And you gotta remember, Egypt had over 40 different types of gods that they worshiped, usually some sort of human-animal hybrid, and they believed that they had all these different roles and stuff like that. And God is speaking, coming straight out of that, to this space that you can't have all these different gods. There is only one God. So it's not this crazy thing that he was standing up. It was actually a countercultural statement that he was making. But it's not only in Egypt that this happened. There was a god named Baal, who was the Canaanite god of nature, who fought another god named Mot. And if Baal would win, there would be 7 years of fertility. But if Mot won, there would be famine. Makes sense to me. That was something that they believed there. Then there was Dagon, who is the god of the Philistines, and had the body of a fish and a human head. And he was the god of water and grain, and he played a large role in crops, as they believed. This is what they worshiped. There was other, images and statues that people in different cultures would worship, like we said, the Egyptian gods, and even look in history at like Greek gods. Can you imagine being the first person that climbed Mount Olympus looking to find all the Greek gods living up there? They got to the top, you finally take a sip of water, exhausted, like, all right, Zeus, where are you, buddy? It's just snow. There's nothing up here. It'd be confusing. But there was very much in all of these cultures the idea of not just one God, but that gods were everywhere, and that gods existed in every space, and it became this kind of way to understand and to control our narrative, control the culture, and put kind of a stamp on things of how we could understand the world around us. And it's something that, it's easy to kind of dunk on those societies back then because, Zeus wasn't on top of the mountain. There's been fairly provable evidence that a lot of these things didn't exist or don't exist. And as time has gone on, that's been something that, that was kind of primitive and prior to now, and now they know, now we know. But we actually are not that different today. And it's becoming more and more relevant to our modern world that we're living in right now, not just in globally, but very much in young adult culture, in the up and coming generation. There's more and more of this stuff happening. And I know that when we look at the world in the past, the golden calf, the statue, it was just a golden statue, and that we would really more or less not worship those things today, but there are other things that we put in the place of those idols, of those statues in our lives that are equally an idol, that are equally in opposition to God, that he is jealous of and will not stand for. It's not a bronze animal, but it's something else that gets in our way and makes us further and further from God. This idea that we are the masters of our own domain. The idea is that we are the most important part of our lives, that we are the gods of our existence. Listen, we live in a multicultural society, which is great. It gives us the chance to experience all sorts of culture, all sorts of food, and all sorts of different things about the world around us, especially that you don't have to travel around the world to experience all this food, all this culture. It's all in our backyard in Canada. That's something I think we should celebrate. But there's this idea of only being one God that is true, and that is what the Bible says, and that is in a lot of ways a contradiction to the way that culture would look around. There's all these different religions that have come to this one space. We live in a society where there's all these different gods, whether it's Buddhism or Mormonism or Islam or all these different religions that exist, all these worldviews, and the idea that there's no wiggle room and there's one God, only one God, the God of the Bible, is often looked at with disdain and negativity, because it would be in direct conflict with all these different worldviews. And so that's seen as mean, unkind, unjust. And it's frankly, honestly, it's not nice to tell people that they're wrong about something. So to make a statement that's absolute and as hard-lined as that is, would become something that would become a area of intolerance for the world around us in a lot of ways. But the reality is that there's so much more to the conversation than just kindness or rudeness, that truth is a hard conversation to have at times. And I really don't think that the biggest issue that we run into in our society right now is this idea that there's all these different gods and that everyone is flocking to worship all these different things or these choosing different religions, but it actually comes down to our heart. And like I mentioned earlier, ourselves and our self-importance and worshiping us. Let's take a look at the book of 1 John in chapter 2. It says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." Again, that's in 1 John. Listen, that can kind of become this buzzword in church circles where we talk about the world, right? We're it can't be of the world. The world is bad. Well, listen, we live in the world. The world itself isn't evil, isn't something that we need to hide from. But when he's talking about the world here, he's talking about anything in existence, anything in our life that would keep us distant from God, that is not in alignment with a Jesus-based life, that would be polarizingly in conflict with the way that God has called us to live. Sin, all those things would be something that would be categorized as worldly or the world. It's not a term I like to use a ton, but it's in the Bible. The world isn't evil, but the things that are more of the world around us and of the culture around us than are of Jesus, of God, those are evil. Those could be idols, false gods from other religions, or even just self-worship. This verse really captures the issue at hand because I think the number one false god or idol that we worship is in fact not from a traditional religion. It's not something that's been imported, an imported deity from across the globe. That's not that picture that most people or boomers would have of worshiping other gods, but it's actually an increasingly strong and very, very powerful sense of self-worship and self-value. There's an increasingly notable growth, especially amongst young adults, in this lack of faith in a God or a traditional religion. More and more we see these openness to pseudo-spiritual understanding. Spirituality is very positive, but anything that takes the vast expanse of spirituality and the world and what God could mean and the universe and takes it into any sort of rigid understanding or channels is not something that's looked upon as super positive. It's seen as just kind of this very overly structured and rules and regulation based. And I understand that sentiment to an extent, but we want to live out here, kind of floating through the spiritual world around us, but we don't want to actually define anything as truth or not, because then we are faced with the reality that some are right and some are wrong. And that's just not something our culture is comfortable with. And while we continue to see the skepticism to organized religion, we see more and more this spiritual context of being open to anything. There's actually more of an openness to experiencing spirituality through psychedelic drugs and different things like that, and church attendance is dropping because it's not as sexy, it's not as fun, it has way more of a time constraint, way more of these like what you might call rules or whatever you want to call it. It's not as open, it's not as fluid, and it's harder to do correctly because there are more defined ways of living than just to say, figure out whatever your spiritual space is, figure it out, whatever works for you, and you can do it. And it sounds nice on paper, and it's spacey, and it's easier, but it doesn't really give you anything to chew on. Because if your belief, if your spirituality is in a direct contradiction to what I believe with my spirituality, pretending that that contradiction doesn't exist isn't nice, it's crazy. I'm not saying we have to be at war with each other over our belief system. I'm not saying that we need to be in conflict and being rude and mean, because we've seen enough of that. But let's not pretend like there's nothing that's true in the world around us, because it's just silly. It's just silly at the end of the day. So have we just moved beyond the need for religion? Have we moved past the need for a God? Have we moved past the need for God in our lives? Have we, liberated ourselves? Have we had this awakening as a society where we no longer need God himself? We have been able to, just legislate heaven on earth into our lives. We don't need God anymore. Or is it just that we've replaced him with our own sense of self-importance, or that we've replaced God with this sense that we are now in control because we no longer worship a God, but we worship our political ideologies or our identity politics or our philosophical and political belief systems? Wars used to be kind of fought over different religions historically, and that's not a good thing. But now it seems like we're constantly fighting because we spend more time in valuing our political and ideological belief systems than we do in who God actually is and what the meaning of life is. We find the value of our life not in the God that created us and have different opinions on that and different cultural understandings of that, but it's actually my team that I've chosen because I'm smarter than the other people is the one that I want to fall in line with. And that becomes more about political ideologies online. That's where we see the trend to the far right on Twitter and the far left and these polarizing ideologies that fight constantly. And I think it's not just because of bots on Twitter or anything like that, but I think what we run into is it's actually, I want to be self-important, and so I put the value into the things that I choose, and I'm at war with anyone who disagrees with me. And it's not to get political, but it shows that the root of that is truly that we worship ourselves because everyone believes they are the smartest person in the room at all times. There are world leaders, I'm like, that guy's an idiot. Well, he's probably smarter than me in a lot of ways, even if I disagree. Not everyone who disagrees with me is an idiot. But at the end of the day, I think that I am the most intelligent person. I'm the smartest one, and that comes from this growing sense of pride and this growing sense of self-worth. So, can we agree that not everything can be true? Not everything can be true, but yet the idea of one true God kind of freaks us out. And maybe you're here today and you've never really been to church before. You don't follow Jesus, you don't follow God. Maybe you're completely atheistic in your belief system. And you're thinking, well, this is a tough conversation. Does the idea of God freak you out? Does the idea of there being one truth, is that a conflicting idea for the way you live your life? So why does that matter? Why can't we just move on? Why can't we just put the blinders on? Well, the reality is that just like it said in that verse in Exodus, there is only one God, and he is not interested in sharing that title. And if there is only one God, we need to do everything in our lives to align with that God. Not because it's easy, not because it's the most fun thing, but the reality is because it is true. If there is truth that there is one God, we need to seek that God with everything in our heart and everything in our lives. So if that makes sense, why are we constantly moving towards this pseudo-spiritual, I want to kind of try everything out? You know, there's so many different ways to live your life. One of the popular things we see more and more is this idea of manifesting your own future. These manifestations of, if I speak it into existence, if I wake up every day and I look in the mirror, I'm like, I will be a billionaire. I will get that girlfriend, that boyfriend, that person that I've wanted to date for a long time. I will talk to them today. I will not fail because I am a human and I am strong. And then it never happens. But this is the thing. It actually isn't anything that we can do. We're not just speaking out into the universe, and I'm not saying that there's nothing beneficial from positive self-talk. I think that it's good to have a positive outlook on life, but you're not speaking into the universe, this manifesting existence. They're speaking out into space, and it's gonna come back, and you're gonna gain this positive chi or this positive karma because of this existence and these things that you say day after day after day. Even though there's a trend towards that direction, it doesn't mean that it's true. But we're open to that. So there's a tension there. So why are we so happy to do that? Why are we so happy to say that when I speak these things, when I try all these different things, it's gonna work for me, and even if I know that there's conflicting ideas between this and that and this and that, I'm not gonna acknowledge those, I'll put the blinders on. Why are we so willing to live in this oxymoron space in our society and in our own lives? Well, first of all, I think it's this. And this really comes down to one of the biggest issues we run into as a society, and that's pride. Pride. The idea that I am uncomfortable with being told I'm wrong. Because like I said, I'm the smartest person in my own head at all times. I have too much pride, and I don't want anyone to tell me what to do, because if I ask for help, if I deal with a situation in a way that I wouldn't have done it originally, then I'm acknowledging that I'm not that smart. Have you ever gone to like Home Depot with your dad or boyfriend or husband or something like that? And it's like, we're looking for staplers. I know me and my dad went to Home Depot one time. We're looking for the big staplers, and we can't find them anywhere. We've been there for like 10 minutes, and eventually, I'm kind of like, hey, Dad, we should probably go talk to that guy over there in the big orange vest. He works here. No, I don't need to do that. Nope, not asking for help. I'm like, okay, well, let's keep looking. 10, 15 minutes go by. We can't find the big staplers. Dad, we should talk to the guy. It literally says customer service associate on his name tag. No, he doesn't know nothing. I know what to do. We've been here half an hour, Dad. Half an hour. Finally, 45 minutes later, we go, and finally I'll just say, okay, Dad, I'm gonna go to the washroom. Come over, hey. My dad won't, like, do you know where the staplers are? Yeah, they're right in front of you. Okay, thank you. When we get too proud to ask for directions, we're just gonna keep getting lost. It doesn't matter how much my dad thought that he was right and that he knew where he was going. It didn't add up in logic or truth. We would have been there for weeks. We'd still be there years later looking for staplers because he refused to ask for directions. And that sounds so stupid and over the top, but we do that in our spiritual walk in a lot of ways. Because we're too proud to acknowledge that maybe we don't know where everything goes. Maybe we don't know where the situation lands. Maybe we don't know the history. Maybe we don't know the best case scenario for our lives. And we have to acknowledge and put our pride to the side and say, God, direct me. I don't know. I'm not in control. And that leads to kind of the next thing that causes this sense of self-value, of self-worship. And I think that it's less sinister, but it manifests in a way that is equally destructive, and that is the fear of missing out. FOMO. We all have that, right? Where you don't want to miss out on anything. And I think that we want to try everything. Like, we want spirituality to be like a trip to Costco, where we can just sample every little thing. And we just have we can try it before we buy it. We can kind of experience every opportunity. But at the end of the day, it really isn't the best way to live your life. We're scared we're gonna miss out because we wanna try every single thing, but can I tell you this here tonight? You will never miss out on the best that life has for you if you follow Jesus. Jesus may not always be the sexiest pick in the line of things that you can have in life and the opportunities, and it may close some doors on some things that in the immediate future look like they'd be more fun. But I'll tell you this, while you may feel in the moment like you're missing out on some opportunities or some fun things that we would call sin or that wouldn't be in alignment with a Jesus-based life, I can tell you this, that no matter how much you think you're missing out on those, you will never miss out on the best version of life for you. The best decision you can ever make in your life is to follow Jesus, and we believe that here, and we live for that here at The Project, and I promise you this, you will never miss out on the best that life has for you if you follow Jesus. The things that you think you're missing out on, the opportunities that you think they're going to be more fun in the moment, they will never add up in comparison to following Jesus. And here's the third thing that I think really breaks us apart from this conversation. That brings us to this sense of self-worth. And it's actually this false sense of comfort that we seek. We want to be happy, but we really want to be comfortable. Comfort drives us in so many ways because we think that if we're in control, then we don't have to, kind of float through the air. We don't have to go where someone else tells us to go. Comfort is everything. And the devil and the enemy and any force that doesn't want us to be connected with God will tell us that if you follow all these different things, you can try them. You can just be the master of your own domain. You don't need God in your life. You can try all these different pseudo-spiritual ideologies, all these different things. Find your value in your politics and different gods, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, it's actually not going to make you more comfortable. The devil's lies, they masquerade as freedom or comfort, but really they lead to spiritual slavery. And here's the thing, we always think about the devil, right? Like he's this super, evil guy, and he is, and he's gonna come and he's gonna tell us hey, you should do crystal meth. Jump into this pit of vipers and poisonous snakes. Throw a package of straws into the turtle aquarium at the zoo. There's always, we think it's gonna be this direct and easy, hey, you should do crack cocaine. That's not a good thing. And we think that it's this very quick trajectory towards destruction in our lives, but it's usually not like that. It's usually a half-truth. When we look at the first time that the devil convinced humanity to rebel against God and to sin, he didn't say, hey, disobey God and you're gonna have pain and suffering and death and hell and destruction and all these things. No. He said, disobey God and you will know the difference between good and evil just like God does. Because before that, there was no sin in the world. So humanity didn't know the difference because he never experienced bad. He didn't technically lie. The moment we sinned, we then knew the difference. But it was a half-truth. It was manipulative. It drew us in with something that promised us more than it could deliver. It promised us, this sense of control. It promised us this sense of just being able to experience things that we wanted, we didn't even know we needed or that we wanted, but now here's the opportunity. But at the end of the day, it led to destruction. He never tells you the whole story. There's always fine print. And he does that with comfort. Because what is perceived as comfort will lead to destruction and slavery down the road. And at the end of the day, we want to trust ourselves. You may be looking at your life, and you may be hearing what I'm saying. You're like, Jeff, I don't follow Jesus. And honestly, I'm kind of into all this pseudo-spiritual stuff. I'm into it. It's good. I'm trying all these different religions. I've traveled the world. There's so many things culturally that the world has to offer. But are you certain? Do you know that for a fact? And you may say, well, I feel good about it. I have no sense of disdain or tension when I look at the world like this. I look at the way I'm living my life. Well, I want to look at a couple of verses. There's one in the book of Proverbs in chapter 28. It says, those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe. Then we look in 1 Corinthians 4, 3-4. It says, as for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or by any human authority. I don't even trust my own judgment on this point. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove I'm right. It is the Lord himself who will examine me and decide. The guy talking here is named Paul. Paul was a pastor who started tons of churches. He is one of the biggest characters in the Bible. He wrote a good chunk of the second half. He had this miraculous conversion where he met Jesus on his way to murder Christians and ends up being one of the biggest catalysts for the cause of Christ in the world. He's deeply connected to God. He's a force for the gospel. And yet he is saying here, I don't even trust my own thoughts. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove I'm right. We see in the verse before that, those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe. And what he's saying is not it's hopeless and you can never be comfortable and never ever trust that you're in the right space and you constantly have to be walking this tightrope, but he's saying, my heart, Jeff's heart, your heart, the human heart, we are so scorned with sin. We are so corrupted by the cause that sin has brought into our hearts and our lives that we cannot totally even trust our own hearts and minds at times. Again, not that we have to constantly be living in this fear and not trust anything. My own thoughts are terrible and I can never ever, I'm losing my mind because of this. But no, what he's talking about is, listen, there may be times where you may believe you're on the right path. You may even feel good about it. But if you're not regularly checking and balancing your life and your decisions and your beliefs against God's Holy Spirit speaking into your heart, against to what the Bible says as a baseline for truth in your life, you have the potential to be walking off the rails without even knowing it. And again, it's not meant to be hopeless. It's not meant to be this thing that we should constantly live in the tension and fear of. But it means that we need to be regularly going back to the source of truth, which is God, which is Jesus in our lives, or else we could easily just kind of fade away from truth. Our own feelings will betray us, and we can easily find ourselves walking into destruction without even knowing it. So let's just say you're here today and you have friends that are not people that believe in Jesus. How do you navigate these? How do you navigate a world and being, a part of the world around us that, they don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe in these things. Maybe they believe in a separate God from a different religion, from a different place, or maybe they just believe in pseudo-spirituality and that there is no truth, it's all relative. How do you navigate that? How do you share the gospel with somebody? How do you talk about Jesus, which we're all called to do in a way that's loving, but still brings truth to the table? First way is that I think you need to be patient and show your love through your actions before your words. We often see these bad examples of people screaming on street corners and telling people they're wrong. And listen, even if you're correct, it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter how you communicate truth. Do it with love. Do it with conviction. But also do it with your actions. The way that you communicate love will show a lot about how much God is acting and flowing through your life. Because Jesus didn't go out and call everybody that didn't believe in the way of God when he was on earth hypocrites. He reserved that word for people that actually claimed to follow Jesus and were doing it in a way that was contrary. So we can't be arrogant and rude and unloving, so we need to be kind and love our neighbor as much as we can. But you also need to know what you believe. If you don't know what the Bible says, if you don't know God, if you don't know what it means to be a follower of Jesus, if you don't have that in your heart, if you're not regularly in Scripture, in the Bible, if you're not regularly praying, if you're not in Christian community, whether that's a small group or just a group of friends that you can have those hard conversations about life and God with, you're going to have a hard time loving your neighbor. You're going to have a hard time being able to articulate conversations when questions do come up. You need to be invested in God to be able to invest in other people's lives for God. And here's one really hard one. Recognize that sometimes the truth may be offensive. If we don't believe in truth at all, yet we as Christians, people who follow Jesus, who know the one true God, the one true call, we're called to share truth to a world that is increasingly moving post-truth. How do we communicate that? Well, the reality is you may be seen as offensive at sometimes. I'll do everything I can to be as loving as possible, to not be proud and arrogant in how I communicate these things, but at some point we have to stand up for truth. And that doesn't mean, that's not a political statement, that's not an ideological motive. That's just saying at some point, if someone asks you, is God the only God that exists? Or can I worship a golden calf? Can I worship my own self-importance? Can I seek my own interest above all other things and still be somebody that subscribes to a Jesus-based life that's in alignment with what God has called us to be? The answer is no. No. That's hard because it may cause some tension. But I will say this. You want to be kind to people? The most unkind thing you can do is lie to people when you know the truth. And it's not, I have some inside information and this is something I created and I'm so smart because I know who God is and you don't and you're an idiot. It's saying, no, listen, I was lucky enough that I have been able to come across this and experience this, and I want you to experience it too. And I'll do whatever it takes to help you to figure out what this looks like in your own life. But the reality is, even if this is a conflicting conversation, I love you too much to not tell you the truth. I can't just pretend like this isn't the facts. I can't pretend like you don't need to know this because this is eternally important. Friends, listen, there is nothing more important than who you claim Jesus is. The decision to claim that Jesus and know that Jesus is God is the difference between eternity separated from him and eternity with him. Connection to God or disconnection for eternity from God. This is a monumentally important decision. And whether you're there already, you're here kind of figuring out what that might look for you, or whether you followed that belief and you've had that in your life for, decades at this point. It doesn't matter because it is so important. It doesn't matter where you're at. It is the most important decision that you can ever make. In John 14:6, it says, Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. When we look at pluralism, when we look at all these different perspectives, when we're faced with this conversation, there is no other option. Jesus is the only option. There is one God. He came to earth in the form of a man, Jesus. He died on the cross to take the sin and take the punishment that we should have had to carry. He didn't deserve to die, but he chose to because he knew that it would take our place on the cross. He suffered and was tortured on a cross so that we could be reconnected to God. There is no other option. Jesus doesn't give us another option. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father. Nobody comes to God. No one can be fulfilled the way that God and only God can fulfill them except through relationship with Jesus, acknowledging that Jesus is God and is the Lord of your life and that you need to follow his example and chase after him in everything you do. Nothing else, no pseudo-spiritual ideology, no other God, no other religion, nothing else will fulfill you. Nothing else is an option. Jesus doesn't give it to us. That's not meant to be arrogant. I don't say that with pride. That's not the easiest answer. That's not the simplest way to do this. But it's the truth. And truth matters. So maybe you're here tonight and you're thinking, man, I have been kind of figuring out life for a long time. I've been trying to figure out where this God thing, where Jesus, I don't know, if there is God, I don't know, but I've been trying to seek this out. And you're thinking now, I think I'm ready to follow Jesus. Maybe I don't have all the dots connected, but I'm willing to give this thing a try. I believe that Jesus exists and Jesus is God. I'm gonna pray with you in just a second. That's the best decision you can make. But maybe you're here and it's been a long time, or you're watching online and it's been a long time since you've really been at church. You had a bad experience, or you used to follow Jesus, but then you kind of got into some things that pulled you away and you're not sure exactly how to fit this into your worldview, and you're still finding the tension in that area. It's always open to come back to Jesus. It doesn't matter how far away you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter who you've been. It doesn't matter what you've believed. It doesn't matter any of that stuff. You are never too far for Jesus. There's hope for you no matter who you are, whether you've been a Christian your whole life, whether you've been taking a little bit of a sabbatical over the last few years and you're ready to come back, or whether you're willing and looking to make that decision for the first time right now. It is the most important decision you can make because it has eternal consequence. Because it not only gives us access long-term through eternity to God, but it also means that we can live the most fulfilling version of life. We never have to worry about missing out. There is no FOMO with Jesus because there is nothing that will fulfill you more than a Jesus-based life. So if that's you, before we sing a couple more worship songs with the band, I want to pray with you. And you can just kind of bow your heads or whatever you're comfortable with and just pray along with me. It's really simple. It's a lifelong journey, but it's as simple as acknowledging Jesus as God of your life. So God, thank you that you are in control. Thank you that you are the God of the universe. Thank you, Jesus, that you died on the cross to take our place for sin, that there is hope and freedom available to us. Even if it doesn't always seem like the easiest way through life, thank you that you are the best option. You are the only option. So God, I acknowledge the sin in my life. I acknowledge I need to turn the other direction and walk away from it and start following you. And I pray, God, that as I figure out this thing called, Christianity, following you, Jesus, that that you would continue to drive me towards things that are in alignment with you. So Jesus, thank you. Thank you that we have hope. And we just pray, that this would be the beginning of something incredible. Amen. If that's you, obviously we want to chat with you.